Congratulations, you finally did it. You came to the decision to open your own coffee roastery. What an exciting moment. You probably already have looked on what you need when it comes to equipment, you prepared everything, and now it's a time to buy your first green coffee beans. And what an overwhelming situation this can be. There are so many options, so many possibilities, and therefore in this video I'm going to share with you experiences that I have made, but that also a lot of my friends who have roasteries have made. If this is of interest to you, then listen closely. I'm Ingo from Roastery, and now let's go. Buying your green coffee beans is the most important thing when having a coffee roastery, because this is then at the end the product you are going to sell to your customers. And here are the 4 most important aspects when you're buying your first green coffee beans. First, you have the choice on which coffee you want to buy. Then second, we have the decision on which amounts you are going to buy. Then third, we are going to have a look at where to source these coffees from. And then fourth, we are going to look at how the processes are so that you get good coffee and that you also then can preserve a great quality of your coffee beans in stock. Let's start with the super important question of which coffee are you going to source. And what's here then the base of it is your business plan. So in every case you need to do a business planning, or you need then to have an understanding on what you want to achieve with your roastery, how you're positioning your roastery, because this is then going to directly affect which coffees you are going to buy. Some questions you can ask yourself here are, for example, for whom am I going to roast coffee? Am I going to roast mainly for then private customers, or am I going to roast for gastronomy or then even offices? So the more you're getting into gastronomy and offices, the more important it is to have consistency, even a bit over quality. So to have a consistent coffee, because this customer expect a coffee, they're getting used to it, and then once they have this quality, they agree to this quality, it needs to be always the same. You might also remember when you're going to a restaurant, you have your favorite dish and you want it to be always the same. So therefore, for example, let's talk about gastronomy. They want to have a coffee quality or an espresso quality that is then up to their standards. What's coming then in addition of not having then different beans or then different tastes is that also the way it has to be roasted, or then it is in its freshness or in its quality, has to be consistent. Because imagine, for example, if I have a restaurant, I'm going then to put the coffee in my machine, because usually then they have not so experienced personnel. They're just putting the coffee in their fully automated machine. It's being grinded and served. If the coffee is then on one time then a little bit like lighter or darker or just different in the structure, it might be then over extracted or under extracted, so it might be bitter or sour, while actually mostly people are hating coffee if it's too sour. So it's not only about acidity, but also if you have an under extracted coffee, this is something that people are really hating. Therefore, when roasting for gastronomy, it's super important to be always consistent. But same is then also, for example, then if you're roasting for workplaces, for offices, you might also know it if you have ever worked in an office, how emotional these discussions then are in the coffee corner. A lot of people are complaining about the coffee, and then once the company have found a coffee which most of the people like, they're super happy. They're happy that they finally closed those discussions, so they don't want to open it again. And then if you're then delivering quality that is not up to the standard that they're used to, then you might be away from the window, because then they're taking other suppliers. But also when it comes then to private customers, they usually want to have consistency. So that's usually then the main thing customers are looking for, unless you have then really a customer group that is more into specialty coffee, or a customer group that is then more aware or more able to work on their coffee machines. So if you're a bit more positioned in that way, that you have customers that are more experimental and also more experienced in how to extract the coffee, then you have maybe a little bit more flexibility. Nevertheless, consistency is usually something customers are looking for. Like usually the only roastery that are not so much bound to this consistency are those roastery who are then really positioned in the specialty segment or maybe then also in the premium segment, because they are then going to roast more different coffees according to the crop they're coming in. So usually then they have more in and out coffees, fresh coffees. They have the coffees when it arrives, and when it's finished, then it's gone. So those roasteries, they can allow to have a higher variety or higher changes than in their assortment. So then directly related to that is the question on what target group do you want to roast for? Is it usually then a bit a broader target group? So do you want to roast for various people who are not so much, for example, into specialty coffee? And you might have to now realize it as well, because you started to get into coffee, you have fallen in love with those specialty coffees, you are excited on what you find here. You're bringing it then to your friends or family, you're roasting and serving the coffee to them, and actually, if they're honest, they're not really excited, because at the end, most people, like the big bulk of people, they have a kind of understanding how coffee shall taste, and they're expecting a particular coffee, for example, a coffee with a bit lower acidity, with a bit more chocolatey, nutty notes. That's just at the end then what a lot of people are looking for. And this is then a mistake a lot of roastery are doing, that they want to showcase what they have, that they want to make too much in the beginning, while they should actually then be starting with the coffees that their target group is then expecting or is looking for. There is actually a saying when it comes to roastery, even roasteries that are positioned in the specialty segment, and this is Brazilian is paying the bills. And this is Brazil coffee is paying the bills. So still most people like then this profile, which you can typically find in Brazilian coffees, like this chocolatey, nutty profile, this balanced profile. So this is then often the bulk of coffees. So if you are targeting a little bit a broader range of customers, then you usually have a small assortment or a small range of coffees in your assortment that is covering about 80% of the business. And then in addition to that, you might have some coffees that then are adding a little bit to rotation or to excitement, or where you can showcase a little bit. But this is then usually really a smaller segment of, let's say, about 20% of what you do then with your roastery. But of course, you can have a completely different positioning. That's also possible. One thing is, for example, if you're then clearly positioned as a specialty coffee roastery, then of course you have more flexibility to then showcase or bring coffees that are a little bit different, that are a little bit exciting. It can then also be changing in the assortment that you have, because people are more experimental. But then you really need to be clearly positioned in that segment. And usually then also you need to have the possibility to then also find those customers. So be, for example, in a little bit a bigger city, or have a good presence on the internet so that people then find you. So this is, of course, a nice possibility to start your business. Just be aware that then you really need to be then positioning or also communicating yourself in a way that you then also find your target group. Or then if you go a little bit even more extreme, is if you're then positioned in this premium segment, in this competition segment, maybe even, where you then usually then also have international customers. And there, of course, you also can have more rotations. You can have more than variety in the coffee that you are serving. So these are then special segments that are a little bit different from the way most roasteries are operating. But this is then really directly related to the next thing I have on my list, and this is the question of, do I have coffees that are permanently on my menu or in my assortment, or do I have in-out coffees? So for most roasteries, as said before, I'm going to have at least a certain stock of coffee that I want to offer over the whole year. So I really need then to have the right planning. I really have to build an assortment where I then have coffees where I have consistency, and then often I can maybe then play a little bit around, or maybe have in addition then coffees where I can bring in a little bit more of variance. But the most of your coffees that you're going to offer might be coffees that you want to have then consistently over the whole year. And here's then, of course, also the question, which are the right coffees to offer? And I also remember then, in my case, here I did a mistake, because at the beginning when I bought my first coffees, I was really then buying coffees where I was really excited for. So I was buying a Honey Castillo, I was buying a Natural Gucci, I was buying then also a Geisha from Colombia. So I had really exciting coffees, but I had then to find out that most people were not really looking for exactly these coffees. So I started then to add more and more coffees and then also try out things. So maybe you also have then to find a way where you can start, where you can offer a little bit more so that you then find your target group, so that you're not committing to big amounts and big lots of a coffee without prior knowing if you then find the target groups or the people that are being excited for this coffee as much as you might be when you're doing a cupping now. Then the next question is, do you have particular values that you are then going for? Do you want to share stories, or do you want to have a special relation to the origin? Do you want to have special conditions in which you are going to source your coffee? How relevant this is of course then directly affecting what kind of coffees you are going to source and where you're going to source these coffees from. So things you have to look at are, in first place, of course, always the taste profile, because you are going to sell a sensory product, you're going to sell a product that people want to enjoy. So first thing then is always to have a coffee that is tasting according to what you want to offer people. And here then you have to question yourself, what am I going to serve to my customers or to sell to my customers? What are they looking for? Is it more like then fruity coffees, floral coffees, or is it more like full-bodied coffees, coffees with a bit less acidity? Acidity is always something to really have a look at. Then also the preparation method. Are my customers more drinking espresso, or as for example then in Switzerland a cafe crema, or are people then buying more, for example, than these survey filter coffees? So here you have then to balance which coffees you are going to purchase and then sell and serve your customers. Now, one thing we haven't been talking about it yet, but which is super relevant, of course, is then the price of the coffee you are going to pay for, or you're then also going to charge from your customer, because this is directly related. So at the end, you need to find a coffee which is in the quality that is up to your standards, which is then also in the quality that is relevant for your customers, and then at the same time at the price, which is then also in a way that you can build a sustainable business out of it, because you are going to have a lot of costs that are coming on top of the price of the green coffee beans you are buying. So you need really to have the possibility to have quite then a multiple on the coffee price that you're getting, in order to not only cover the cost, but also then have a margin to have some safety, security for everything that might happen when you have a roastery, and then also to build and develop then your coffee business or your coffee roastery sustainably. And this is of course then also related again to the positioning where you have. So either you are in a segment where you have big competitions and then people are more price sensitive, or you are then in a segment where you have then a stronger positioning so that people are a bit less price sensitive because of the quality, or because of you as a person with your positioning, or because of the service you are then going to provide. So here you have a possibility then also to define which kind of price sensitivity you are going to have. Just be honest when you're defining that, which is my target group and how price sensitive are they then to the coffees they're getting. And here is one big mistake a lot of roasteries are doing. They're just having a look at the cost of the green coffee beans, and then they're thinking, oh, this is now my cost that I have to calculate with. I see it particularly often then when I see discussions about green coffee being purchased in bigger or smaller amounts. They just think, okay, so if I see a price on a list, that's about the price that cost me for 1 kilo of coffee. But then at the end, there is a lot of costs that are coming in addition. One thing I can tell you is that actually a big portion, or maybe even the biggest portion of the price you have in the coffee is about logistics. Just imagine, the higher the amount of coffee you're getting, the less you have on logistics per kilo that you have, because of packaging, because of the whole process, the paperwork and everything you're doing. So of course then if you're buying a whole container from a source, then it needs to be just once done when it comes to paperwork. It's super simple to then sell a whole container for. Therefore, you will get a much better 1 kilo price on a whole container than you get for example, a 1 kilo bag. Of course, that's quite obvious, I think. But then the smaller amounts are a pallet. So the next thing when it comes then down from a container is a pallet. Usually a pallet has about 10 bags. So a bag is usually either 60 kilo or 69 kilos. So Central Americans are often 69 kilo, other like African, Brazilian, or then also Asian coffees are often in 60 kilo bags, or sometimes it's also 50 kilo. If you're going then into the top specialty segment, it might be 30 kilo, then even 2 times a 15 kilo vacuum pack. But let's stick to the way most coffees that we are going to roast in smaller roastery or mid-sized roastery is packed. And these are then these 60 to 69 kilo bags. And usually then on a pallet, they have 10 bags. And they're then really wrapped. They're coming like that from the origin. And of course, for a coffee trader, it's quite simple to take a pallet out of a container and ship it to your roastery. So here they don't have too much cost. But then when it comes for them, for example, to open this pallet, take down one bag of coffee on another pallet, then kind of having to deal with these already opened, unwrapped pallets that they have on their warehouse, but then at the same time sending you a 1 kilo bag on a single pallet to your roastery. Can imagine that's then quite a lot of cost. And even worse so when they then have to open these 60 kilo bags and then fill 1 kilo or 5 or 15 kilo bags. So you might have realized a lot of traders, they have then also be playing with the thought of selling coffee in smaller amounts, but most of them stopped it then quite quickly because it's just a lot of work that you have to do. And therefore, logistics have to be taken into consideration. Another thing that has to be taken into consideration is warehousing. And this is then really depending from where you have your roastery. So if you're, for example, in an industry park on the countryside, most probably then space is quite cheap for you, so you can have a bigger warehouse, you can store more coffee there, that's quite then cheap and easy for you. If you then, for example, in extreme case, in a city center or all part of a city, like a bit a smaller place where you have higher rents, then it's super expensive, or even you don't have the possibilities then to store a lot of coffee. So this is then really dependent on where you are, where is your location and what storage facility you have. But warehousing of coffee can be quite expensive because you then really have big amounts that you have to store and carry around there in your warehouse. But then in addition are special fees, of course, then customs that is coming, but there are also then from country to country also different fees. So I can tell you an example which is a little bit funny in Switzerland. So here we have then really a stock of coffee that is preserved in the case that we have a catastrophe or a war. So over the whole time of the last decades, we always have green coffee beans that are stored that then with big green coffee traders. These big green coffee traders, then they get a payment from the government for that, and this payment is then coming from us. So for example, when me as a smaller coffee trader, when we are then importing coffee, we have to pay those fees. Those fees are then being sent to these bigger coffee traders who are then storing the coffee. So this is, for example, something that's coming then in addition in Switzerland. Each country then has this kind of different fees or things that you have then really to take into consideration. Another thing is then, and this is mainly then if you're buying coffee in direct trade, but also, for example, if you're buying it then in a country where you have a different currency. So it's possible that you have then currency changes, and we are going to talk about direct trade later, especially then if you're pre-financing coffee, if they're coming from a country where they have then big currency rate like variances, it can be that you then really have to take this into consideration, that the currency is going to change, and then suddenly you have to pay more for the coffee. And then, of course, what comes in addition are things like how much you're losing of the coffee when you're roasting it, how much you're losing of the coffee when you're trying to find the right profile, for example, for marketing activities, for sampling, but then also maybe for returns. People don't like the coffee, they want to exchange the coffee, or you bought too much coffee and you have then to sell the coffee much cheaper or kind of to get rid of the coffee. So these are then all costs that you have to take into consideration when it comes to calculating the cost of the coffee you are buying. And then at the end, it's always a matter of what is the price I'm paying for my coffee in relation to the quality. And quality is then not only the standards that you are looking for, but really the standards that are then relevant to your customers. So this is always a balance to find. Can be also then, of course, related to that, that you have special values or a special positioning and you say, I want to buy coffee fair or direct, or in a way where I have then more transparency, or where I know that these people who are going to produce the coffee are getting then a fair pricing for the coffee. This is also something that is either more or less relevant. Just be honest with you how much of a relevance this has to you. Be honest with yourself. What are your values here? What's also then coming in addition is that you have, for example, then fees or payments then for certifications like organic coffee, fair trade coffee. Here you pay then also for the certifications, for the audits that are being done. So you have this to take this into consideration then as well. And then something we haven't been talking about yet is the topic of financing or liquidity. Because when you have coffee in your stock, it's just money that is lying around, especially then when you have coffee that is in your stock for a longer time, like let's say for a half year, or you even then have a full harvest that you need to cover your stock for about a year, then it's a lot of money that is lying around in your warehouse. Even more so if you decide to go for a route of, for example, direct trade or a relation of buying coffee where you're pre-financing coffee, then you have even a longer term of money that is bound. So really be aware of the liquidity that you have, not that you're then suddenly out of money because you have too much coffee laying in your warehouse that you haven't sold yet. Now, the second thing is how much coffee shall you buy? And this is then really a difficult topic because on one hand, you want to have availability of coffee, especially if you decided that you have a permanent stock where you then really want to cover a coffee over a longer period. So if you don't have this in-out coffee, but if you're covering then a whole year with your coffees, then you need to have availability. On the other hand, then you want to prevent that you have coffee that is being aged so that you have then to sell cheaply or even then get disposed of. So this is really then tricky to find the right balance. What comes in addition is that it's then also a lot of money, as I said, which is then bound when you have coffee in your warehouse. Here, of course, you have a bit more flexibility if you're one of these roasteries who is then really positioned in a way that you do more in-out. This is then, of course, going to help you a lot because you get your harvest, you get your coffee, you roast it, you sell it as long as it's there, and then you're getting the next coffee. But this is really a model that is only working for a quite small amount of roasteries. Therefore, what a lot of roasteries are doing wrong is that initially they're making a too broad assortment, they're getting too much coffees, and then they have really a difficulty to plan to have this, on one hand, availability, but on the other hand, then also enough rotation to have the coffee fresh. So make sure that you look that you have a bit of smaller assortment, start better with a bit of smaller assortment and build from there, and then add more coffees. This is just helping you a lot, I can tell you, because also, as said before, it's then at the end a quite small amount of coffee or number of coffees that are going then be super popular and that are going to help you then to finance or to build your sustainable coffee business. And then you can always grow from there and add more coffees or more than varieties over the course of the time. Question then also for planning of the amounts is, of course, then also, do you already have customers or are you starting from zero? If you already have customers, you have an insight also on what they like. You have a bit more safety in the planning. If you're starting from zero, then it's really, really tough. And if you're starting from zero, then you have ways of getting the coffee that we're going to start, that we're going to talk about later. But here you really need then to have possibilities to have more flexibility in the way you're sourcing coffee. Maybe you even, if you're smaller, are getting coffees like, for example, from us, where you have a 15-kilo bag. You can try until you find then the coffees that people like, or same is then also possible for smaller amounts, like, for example, 1 bag or 5 bags or something. We are going to talk about this way of sourcing coffee right in a couple of minutes. Then the other things I have here on my list are things we already talked about. So the way of storing your coffee. Do you have a storing facility? How cheap or expensive is it for you to store coffee? This is super relevant. And of course, in deciding the amounts, the liquidity, how much money do you have available? Do you have then also credit lines, or also other possibilities where you can then have more liquidity? Or are you starting then a bit more tightly? So this is then really quite important when it comes then to planning your whole business. Another thing is then availability. Do you want to have a good availability on your coffee? Is something we have been talking about quite a lot right now. But another thing is then also how is it with the availability of the coffee that I want to source? Is it, for example, we are going to talk about this model later, a spot coffee from a trader where I know they have this in stock over the whole year? Actually be a bit cautious with that, because this can also be then not so consistent anymore. Since a couple of years that has quite changed. It used to be quite simple in the earlier days, but now it changed quite a lot. But nevertheless, check if your coffee is going to be available a bit easily, but also if you're getting, for example, a beautiful coffee that you like now, you're getting an annual harvest. Is it then possible that you get the same coffee next year again? Then if you have then these customers that fell in love with your coffee and that you can bind at yourself with this coffee. This is something that you need to check in best case directly when you get this coffee. Another thing is then also the freshness of your coffee. So you can find then calendars for each country where you know when the coffee is going to the harbor and then going to the ships, when are they landing in the US or Europe or wherever you are. So you get these calendars, and then you can also check based either the calendar or better than also in contact with the person you're buying this coffee from, how old or fresh are they. If, of course, then the coffee is super fresh when you're getting it, then you can take a little bit a higher amount because you can store them longer in your warehouse. If the coffee is already quite at the end of the cycles and the next harvest is coming in a couple of weeks, then better only take a smaller amount and then wait for the fresh coffee coming in to buy a bit larger amounts. And now the question is on how can you source or how can you get your coffee. The most common way, and also the way that is giving you most flexibility, especially when you're starting your roastery, is getting coffees from big traders, and then we are talking about so-called spot coffee. So in general, you have two ways of getting coffees. One is spot and one is then contract. Spot means that the coffee is already here in a warehouse close to where you have your roastery. So either be it in the US or in Europe, suggest that you have then the possibility to quickly get the coffee directly from this trader. This is then usually happening for a bit larger coffee traders. And then the other way is that you're doing pre-contract, so that you have a coffee that you want. You are either then committing to an amount of coffee that is going to arrive at a certain time, or you're then even then prepaying for this amount of coffee. So this is then pre-contracting, and these are the two ways you can buy your coffee. So when starting a roastery, really this spot coffee is just giving you more flexibility. It's just making it easier because, as said, you might want to try a little bit more. You need first to find out what coffees your customers like. You need to get an understanding of how much you're going to sell so that you can have a better planning and then go into then commitments for annual contracts. So large traders are then a good source. Usually they are then traders that have a quite broad assortment. So let's say they have, for example, 30 coffees that they're offering from all the countries. Usually then they have also the coffees that are popular for a broader range of people. But there are then also traders that are specialized or that a bit stronger for certain areas. Usually then there are one step smaller, so a little bit smaller, but still trading companies that have spot coffees in their warehouses, but usually then they have a bit closer connections than also to the producers in a specific area. So often they're then focused off a couple of countries where they're getting the coffee from. And then there is also a completely different way of sourcing coffee. And I know this is a very popular one and one that a lot of roastery want to do or want to achieve. And this is then direct trade, which means you are building then relation to coffee producers and you're getting the coffee directly from the coffee producers. You're purchasing the coffee there so that you know how much they're getting. You are in best case then also establishing long-term relationships. You're usually then also pre-financing coffee. So for sure you're committing to certain amounts, but usually then also you're pre-financing at least a part of the coffees you are getting. So this is, of course, then a beautiful way of building a business because you have relations to farmers, you know where the coffee is coming from, you know the stories behind it, you know the qualities, maybe you also then travel and meet them and have then personal relations. That's a beautiful way of building a coffee business, but it's also quite a challenging one because there can be a lot of things that are going to happen in this relation. So on one hand, you're working with humans, so you can be then excited, it can be beautiful things happening, can be also disappointing things happening. But what's even more than that is that there are just so many things that can happen when you are getting a natural product like coffee. So many unexpected things, like, of course, on one hand, then weather, climate influences that are then kind of destroying, for example, a harvest, so that you're getting much less coffee, or that you're getting a different quality than you have expected. There are also possibilities that things can happen during transport, so that the coffee that is arriving is then differently from the coffee that you have purchased, that you expected. It's arriving then differently because something happened, for example, during transport, during logistics. Also, it can be a lot of paperwork if you're getting then coffees from different regions. Nowadays, it's even a bit more complicated, because then you have about every week a change in how much you then have to pay for tariffs. So these are then just a lot of unexpected things that can happen when you're sourcing coffee. But I don't want to discourage you, because it's also possible to then stand behind the values and source coffees from the values that you are looking for when you're thinking about direct trade, but in a much easier way. And we are going to talk about these ways, or these possibilities of sourcing coffee, just in a second. But let's talk about direct trade nevertheless a little bit before, because there are some roasteries, for them it's then crucial, or they really have to build then their business around direct trade. And this is, in my experience, mainly two kinds of roasteries. One is then businesses that are really coming from that. So, for example, you have then a personal or familiar relation, for example, to a region or to a farm, and you really want to support these local communities. You really want to get this coffee and then present it in your roastery, roast it and sell it, so that you're then supporting the local communities. Or you're building here a roastery, and you really are based on these values that you say, I want to make trading different, and I want to have these special relationships to then support those local communities or my partners then in the coffee producing countries. So this is one type of roasteries. But then there is also another type of roasteries, and these are then roasteries that are really in the top premium positioning, often then maybe also in competitions, because they then, on the other hand, they have quite a small group of coffee farmers where they're getting their coffees from. And at the end, there is then a global competition. So they are then really competing for particular lots. And if they want to secure those lots they are looking really forward to, they need to have those close relations to those coffee producers. So they're often then traveling also to the producers. They're at the farms, they're in direct contact, they're cupping the coffee there. They're trying to be as early as possible in order then to get those coffees that they really want to. So these are then these types of roasteries who are doing direct trade really as it is typically done. But if you want to avoid all the hassle that is coming with this business model, but nevertheless have transparency and know where your coffee is coming from and where the money is going, that you're going to pay for the coffees you want to purchase, then there are meanwhile quite a lot of good possibilities where you can get your coffee as well. One are platforms like, for example, Algrano is a platform that I really like. They are connecting coffee farmers and roasteries. So there you can find your coffees then in their system. You then know directly how much I'm going to pay to the producers, to the farmers, so you know how much they're getting for their coffee. You then also at the same time see how much you're going to pay for logistics, because Algrano is then doing the logistics together. So for example, they say, now I have a time slot where I'm getting the containers from Honduras. They taking all the orders from Honduras, they're shipping it then to Europe, and like that they also of course have much lower logistics costs than if you would get a single pallet that you're then, for example, directly getting from a farmer in Honduras. So you have lower logistic costs, you have transparency on the cost, you then also see directly what you're paying them for their work that they're doing. So you have a really good list. And what comes in addition, that depending on the contract that you're doing with them, you can actually have then securities for really only a small amount of more money that you're going to pay, where you then, for example, can say, if the coffee is coming in a different quality of what I have expected or what I have pre-cupped, then I can return or reject the coffee, and they're finding then other solutions to deal with that, because this is of course then a real thing that can happen in direct trade or in coffee trading, that you're getting a coffee that is different from what you have expected. And these are things that are quite easy to solve, for example, in a model like this. Another model is then also, and there is actually quite a lot of good possibilities around, that you're getting coffee, for example, from a family or a local like company or group of people that are representing a couple of farms or a region here where you are. For example, in Europe, talking now for Europe, I have a lot of people that I know where a part of the family is, for example, in Colombia or Guatemala, and the other part of the family is here, and it's then quite easy to get the coffee from them. They're organizing the transport to your country, or at least then to a harbor in the region where you are, so that you have then all the hassle solved with the logistics, but you still know that you're paying this family or this group of producers a price which is then a good price for them to build a sustainable business. Another way is then also that you're kind of working together with other roasteries, and that you're then sharing the work together, that you're sourcing coffee together, or that you're getting coffee from roasteries where you know that they share the same values. A lot of those roasteries are also then offering you a possibility to get coffee from them directly. Now let's come to the fourth aspect, and this is then the procedure or the process of getting your coffee. One thing that you always have to do is you always have to get samples. Be it if you're getting a coffee that is then on stock or spot coffee, or then even more so if you're then of course getting a coffee from a farm, if you're doing direct trade. There it's a bit more complex, you have a bit more steps in sampling. I'm now talking about the way of sourcing coffee more than locally as a spot coffee, for example, or from a local partner. So what you're first going to get is a sample, and I would really recommend you to get green coffee samples so that you can roast them and you know the whole procedure on how long you waited between the roasting and cupping, and you always roast it the same. Only like that you have then the quality control or the comparability. I know that some traders are pre-roasting the samples for you, but this is really nothing that I recommend you. Then what you're doing actually before you're roasting, you're doing a quality check of the coffee, so you're usually getting 50 or 100 gram. I talked about it in other videos. If you really want to then check the coffee on defects, you need 300 grams, but still you can evaluate the sample in this 100 gram or 50 gram. I would also recommend you to take a picture so that you then have documented the quality you got in your sample. Then you cup it. I would also recommend you to keep the rest of your coffee that you didn't cup. You can put it, for example, in the freezer if it's going to take a bit longer until the coffee arrives, or you then put it in a plastic bag so that it's well protected. I also already made the mistake where I then drank all the coffee because I liked it so much, and then the coffee came and I didn't have then the possibility to compare it to the sample anymore. So all those mistakes that we did. But I would really recommend you then to keep the rest of the sample so that you can compare the coffee when it's arriving. Also make sure when you do a contract that you check how the coffee is packed. It's important that the coffee is not only in these burlap packs, but also in Grain Pro or EcoTech, the plastic bag, because that keeps the coffee just fresh for a longer time. We are also selling coffee in 1, 5 or 15 kilo bags. We're always selling them in plastic bags because that's so much better than to preserve the quality of the coffee. Then when the coffee is arriving, you have to do some things when the coffee is arriving. First of all, what I always do is I get then a sample out of it. I make then the quality control where I'm then checking the coffee on defects. Is it the same as I've expected according to the sample? I'm going then to measure the coffee in my Difluidomics Plus. So what's important is that you're measuring at least the moisture content, best case moisture content and water activity, so that the coffee is not rotten or not too wet or too moist, but also not too dry. And this is something that I'm doing for every lot that I'm going to receive. Then, of course, I'm also going to roast the coffee to see is then the quality according to the sample that I had, or is it now full of Quakers? How is the taste? I'm going then to compare, is it really according to the expected coffee? And here you then also have to find the balance, because coffee is a natural product, so it can be different from the sample that you have tasted, but just it must not be too different, so it must not be too old or so, because then You can then discuss with the source where you got your coffee, depending on where you got your coffee. But if you want to get into those discussions, you have to do this immediately when the coffee arrives. If it's then in your warehouse or even packed for a longer time, it's going to be really difficult then to talk with the people about it. So make that directly when the coffee comes. One thing I personally also do is I put the coffee in a quarantine. So I have like a ship container where I put the coffee that I'm receiving in this quarantine. Then I'm putting there like pest control, like where I can then check if there are some flies or something in the coffee that I don't want to have spread over all my coffees in the warehouse. Then I'm checking that, and when it's clean, then I'm moving the coffee to the warehouse. And then, of course, in the warehouse, you have to make sure that you have conditions where your coffee is staying fresh for quite some time. So where the coffee is then stored in a dark, in a cool environment, so that you get a coffee which is fresh then for as long as possible. I hope this video was helpful for you. By the way, if this is content that you like, then make sure you give it a like, a comment, or subscribe, because then I know that we have to do more content like this. Also, if you're just starting into your roastering and you're a bit smaller, then have a look at the assortment of green coffee beans we are also offering. We have 1, 5, and 15 kilo bags. We ship them all over Europe. So this is then covering the range of starting up to sourcing your first full bags or pallets then of coffee that you are getting. Also, if you're interested in small roasting machines, sample roasters, measurement equipment, or knowledge about coffee roasting, or starting your own coffee roastery, then head over to our website where you also find my contact. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. You find everything on roastables.com.